Chapter 18. E Putibus Unum. My father and I had a million things to say to each other, a million things to explain, to forgive. But before we could really start, before we could do more than hold each other for a minute, the ambulance arrived. At the sound of the sirens, we raced out of the room where we had been talking, back toward the nurse's office. We didn't make it inside. The paramedics were there, and it was too crowded for anyone else to enter. Dad put his arm around my shoulders. We didn't wait long. Less than 5 minutes had gone by when I heard a wail from Miss Schwartz. 3 paramedics came out of the room. 2 of them, a man and a woman, were carrying a stretcher between them. On it lay Susan's pale, unmoving body. My father reached out and touched the 3rd paramedic on the arm. Is she? The man shook his head. Not yet, he said softly, but we don't have much hope. Susan. I buried my face against my father's chest and began to sob again, but something weird was happening. I wasn't sure I was aware of it. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but I knew it anyway, in some place deep inside of me. What is that? Cried the man my father had spoken to. Spinning around, I saw a jelly blob oozing its way down the hallway. It stopped for a moment and lifted a pair of eye stalks. Poot! It cried. Another Poot was coming right behind it, and another after that. Turning, I saw them coming from the other direction, too. Kids were running into the hallway, crying, "Come back! Poot, come back!" "Peter, what's going on?" asked my father. Before I could answer, the head of the ambulance team yelled, "Come on, let's get out of here!" "I'm sorry," said Broxholm. "I can't let you do that." He was standing in the door of the medical office, holding a little tube that looked like a pencil. Unlike a pencil, it could melt a door shut. Of course, the people from the ambulance didn't know that yet. They paused, but you could tell they were on the verge of bolting. "What's stopping us?" asked the leader of the team. "Let me put it as a request," said Broxholm evenly. "We need some time. Please bring the child back into the office." Poots were coming from all directions now, sometimes on their own, sometimes being carried by puzzled-looking kids. All of them were heading toward a little medical office. "We need some time," repeated Broxholm. "Let's go," said the woman holding the front of the stretcher. She began walking toward the door. "Wait!" Reaching up with one hand, Broxholm began to peel off his mask, revealing the lime green skin and huge orange eyes underneath. Kids screamed. One of the men turned white and looked as if he was about to faint. My father drew me closer, though whether he was afraid of Broxholm or afraid I might go off with him again, I wasn't certain. The shock tactic worked. "What do you want?" asked the ambulance woman nervously as a steady line of Poots oozed past her. "Just some time," said Broxholm. "Something is happening. I don't know what, but we need to let it happen. I promise we will not hurt you while you are here if you will just take Susan back into the office." I thought that was clever of him. They might blow up the planet later, but they weren't going to hurt the people while they were still here in the shelter. And still, the Poots kept coming. Duncan and his friends had been busy. There were hundreds of them. Peter, whispered my father. "What are these things?" "Poots. What are they doing?" "I don't have the faintest idea." The paramedics were still hesitating. Broxholm moved a finger, and a burst of light from the pencil-like thing burned a hole in the wall just above one of the paramedics' heads. "Please bring Susan back into the office," he repeated. Without a word, the paramedics did as he asked. Poots oozed their way in alongside them. After a moment, Creeblim called, "Peter, I think you should come in here." My father let go of me, and I pushed my way into the medical office, stepping over a half a dozen Poots to do so. Duncan was kneeling beside Susan's body, crying. Miss Schwartz was standing nearby, her face shifting between sorrow and fear. "Peter, I'm going out there to help Broxholm keep things in line," said Creeblim. "You stay here with Susan." "Broxholm?" cried Miss Schwartz, her voice sharp with fear. Then she saw my true face without its mask, and the look on her face changed again. "Peter? Oh, Peter, your father will be so happy." "I suppose there's not much need for this anymore," said Duncan. Working gently, he peeled off the mask that covered Susan's face. Then, with Miss Schwartz still speechless in astonishment, he removed his own mask as well. I went to kneel beside Susan. I could hear Broxholm and Creeblim in the hall trying to decide how to keep people from leaving the building until we could get a decent head start. I stopped worrying about them when I saw what the Poots were doing. It started when 2 Poots met in the center of the room and flowed together. Soon a 3rd joined them, and then a 4th. The Poots flowing into the room moved straight toward the blob in the center of the floor. It continued to grow as Poot after Poot joined the gelatinous mass, making it 2, 3, 4 feet long. And still the poots kept coming, by ones and twos and dozens, until finally we found ourselves facing an 8-foot poot. Miss Schwartz was standing behind me, her hands on my shoulders. "Peter," she whispered, "what is going on?" "I don't know. Just watch." The mass on the floor seemed to writhe for a while, smoothing out lumps in its surface. I could see material flowing inside of it, as it was rearranging itself. Suddenly it thrust out a pair of stalks, each poot as thick as my forearm, and bellowed, "Poot!" Then it began to glide toward Susan's body. "Duncan, get back!" I yelled. Duncan looked at me dully for a moment, then jumped away from the cot. The giant poot moved toward the end of the cot and reared back, so that it was taller than I am. Then it fell onto Susan. As we watched in fascinated horror, it engulfed her body, like an amoeba absorbing a bit of food. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was eating her. I could see her shape throughout the creature's sides, as if I were viewing her through a piece of glass smeared with Vaseline. Before I could catch my breath, a voice behind me said, "We have to go now." "Charlene," said Miss Schwartz, "what are you doing here? And what do you mean you have to go?" "Miss Schwartz, I really like you," said Charlene, "so try not to let this upset you too much, all right?" Then Hulan reached up and pulled off his mask. I could tell how much of a shock his blue-skinned, big-eyed face was to Miss Schwartz from the way her fingers dug into my shoulder. "It's all right," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "He's my teacher." "How wonderful," Miss Schwartz replied in a weak voice. "We have to go," repeated Hulan. "Creblim has called the saucer. It's overhead now, and we'll be touching down in the vacant lot next door as soon as we're all inside." "What about my father?" I asked, a feeling of panic clutching my heart. Hulan hesitated, then sighed. "It is unlikely I can get myself into any more trouble than I already have. I invite him to come. You too, Miss Schwartz." Miss Schwartz looked at Duncan and me. I smiled at her. "No force fields," I said. "Right, Hulan?" "I promise," he said, holding up his hand. "You will be safe as long as Earth itself." At the moment, that wasn't much of a promise, but it seemed to be good enough for Miss Schwartz. "I'll come," she whispered. I could tell she was terrified. I understood that the real reason she was coming was to watch out for us 3 kids. Creblim shouldered her way past Hulan and touched the end of the giant poot with a metal stick. The megapoot seemed to have gone total inert. When Creblim lifted the stick, the huge creature, Susan included, floated into the air. "That's it," said Creblim fiercely. "We're going." Feeling gloomier than I could ever remember, I walked between my father and Miss Schwartz to the saucer. We docked the saucer in the chamber beneath the barn. Using her anti-gravity wand, Creblim carried Susan's poot-wrapped body through the tunnel Broxholm and I had dug into the farmhouse. In the kitchen, she set the poot pod down. On the long farm table. We all gathered around to stare at it. "What is happening?" rumbled Big Julie. "I'll go explain," said Hulan. "He might as well learn that I'm back in the game." Broxholm looked grateful. "What is happening?" asked my father nervously. "I do not know," Creblim replied, her nose slapping back and forth in deep distress. "This kind of poot behavior has never been recorded before." It was the longest evening of my life. "You do realize," said Broxholm late in the day, after we had explained all our adventures to my father and Miss Schwartz, "that tomorrow we must return to the New Jersey to file our final report." "We haven't found much hope, have we?" I whispered. "More than I expected," said Broxholm. "Yet not enough, I fear," said Creblim. "Rightly or not, today's events will confirm the Council's worst fear. Your distrust of outsiders is so great, so deep, that I don't see how you could ever enter the community of planets." "Will it be the button?" asked Duncan. Creblim closed her middle eye, her hair flat in a sign of mourning. She said, "I fear the worst." And that is the end of chapter 18. There's only 3 more. 19, 20, 21. And then we're done with the book. What is going to happen? Is the Earth going to die? If this were a true story, which it definitely is, if this were a true story, we would know that we survived. But we don't know what Bruce is going to have happen. You're just going to have to keep listening.